Dr. Elara Vale was a name well known across the stars, especially among the scientific community. A brilliant xenobiologist, she had spent her life studying alien life and the ecosystems of far-off planets. Her mind was sharp, and her curiosity knew no bounds. Yet, despite her professional success, there was a darkness within her that no one knew. Elara feared touch. More specifically, she feared the touch of men. The past had carved deep scars within her, and though she never spoke of it, they shaped her every decision. She had once been a different person, open, kind, and filled with trust. But an event that had happened long ago on a distant planet had shattered that trust. Since then, Elara had built walls around herself, isolating her from anyone who might make her feel vulnerable. Aboard the Starship Odyssey, she kept her distance from the crew, especially the men. They were always friendly, always respectful, but she never allowed herself to get close. She spent most of her time in the ship's laboratory, buried in her work, studying an unusual energy signature detected on a remote world called Zephyr 9. The planet had recently caught the attention of the Galactic Alliance, and they had decided to send a crew to investigate its strange and mysterious properties. Elara wasn't interested in the political or military side of the mission. She didn't care about the alliances or the leadership. What mattered to her was the planet. It had a strange pull, something that made her heart race every time she studied its data. There was something on Zephyr 9 that might answer questions that had lingered in her mind for years. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a connection to the planet, as though it held the key to something deeper than science alone could uncover. However, there was one thing that made her uneasy: Captain Darius Kane. Captain Kane was the leader of the Odyssey crew, a man with an effortless confidence and a magnetic personality. He was tall, with dark, tousled hair and a rugged face that seemed carved from stone. He had a way of commanding attention, of making people trust him without even trying. And that, to Elara, was the problem. She had never been able to handle the ease with which men like him could make others feel comfortable. For years, she had worked hard to avoid such interactions. She didn't want to be seen as weak, and she certainly didn't want to be touched. Yet Kane, with his quiet strength and undeniable presence, seemed determined to be friendly. He would often stop by her lab to check on her progress or offer help, but Elara always found an excuse to keep him at arm's length. She couldn't explain why, but something about him felt too much. It made her heart race in a way that scared her. One day, as she was reviewing her research, Kane entered her lab without knocking. The door hissed open, and his strong voice called out, "Dr. Vale, I thought I might find you here. How's the research coming along?" Elara froze, her fingers hovering above the datapad in her hands. She didn't look up. "It's progressing," she replied curtly, hoping her tone would signal him to leave. But he didn't. Instead, Kane walked further into the room, taking the seat across from her. She could feel his presence, the way he filled the space without even trying. He was there, watching her, and she hated it. She couldn't understand why his attention unsettled her so much. After all, he was just a man, and men were just like any other, weren't they? "Is there something I can help you with?" Kane asked, his voice soft, yet persistent. "No, I'm fine," Elara replied quickly, avoiding eye contact. She could feel her heart pounding, the tension building in her chest. She needed him to leave. For a moment, there was silence, and then Kane spoke again. "I'm just making sure you're not overworking yourself. The planet we're heading to is unpredictable. We'll need all our strength to understand it." Elara finally looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. She saw something there, something more than just concern. It was a quiet determination, a promise that they would face whatever came together. But Elara quickly turned her gaze away, pushing her feelings back down. She couldn't afford to be weak. She couldn't afford to let anyone in. "I'll be fine, Captain," she said, her voice steady, though inside, her mind was racing. Kane didn't argue, but he gave her a nod before standing. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." He left without another word, and Ilara was left alone once more, her thoughts swirling. The encounter left her uneasy, but it also sparked something inside her, a feeling she had not experienced in years. Maybe Kane didn't know it, but his presence was slowly starting to break through the walls she had built around herself. As the days passed, Ilara found herself thinking about the captain more than she cared to admit. There was something about him, something that made her question everything she had once believed about herself. But for now, Ilara pushed the thoughts away, focusing once again on Zephyr 9 and its mysteries. After all, there were bigger questions to answer. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if the true answer lay not on the planet, but in the connection she had been avoiding for so long. The journey to Zephyr 9 was long, and the Odyssey cut through the deep expanse of space with quiet grace. For weeks, the crew had prepared, gathering data and strategizing their approach. Among them was Dr. Ilara Vale, still focused on her research, but increasingly distracted by thoughts of the planet. Its energy signals had become more intense the closer they got, and Ilara's curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. She had never encountered anything like this before. As the Odyssey neared Zephyr 9, the crew was filled with a sense of anticipation. But for Ilara, it was a mixed feeling, excitement intertwined with unease. It wasn't the planet she feared, but the people she would have to rely on to explore it. And at the top of that list was Captain Darius Kane. Kane was not just the captain of the Odyssey. He was a force of nature. Everyone on the ship seemed to trust him implicitly. His commanding presence was undeniable, and yet it was his calm and easygoing demeanor that made him so approachable. He had a way of making people feel comfortable, of drawing them in, even without trying. It was something Ilara found both impressive and terrifying. She knew she couldn't avoid him forever. Their mission on Zephyr 9 would require cooperation, and for that, she would have to face her fears. But that didn't make it any easier. The moment of confrontation came sooner than she expected. The Odyssey entered Zephyr 9's orbit, and Ilara was summoned to the briefing room, along with the rest of the crew. Kane was already there, standing at the front, his posture straight and commanding. When Ilara entered, his gaze briefly met hers before he turned his attention to the rest of the team. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice deep and steady. "We're about to land on one of the most unique planets we've ever encountered. Zephyr 9 has displayed strange energy patterns, which could be a sign of intelligent life, or something even more unusual. Our mission is to explore, learn, and gather as much data as possible. Dr. Vale's expertise in xenobiology will be essential for understanding whatever we find." Ilara could feel the weight of the room's attention on her. Everyone knew her reputation, and though she preferred to stay in the background, her skills were respected. But this time, the stakes were higher. Zephyr 9 wasn't just a planet to study, it was a mystery that needed solving. Kane continued, giving instructions on their roles during the exploration. Ilara's task was clear. She would lead the scientific team, analyzing soil samples, studying the atmosphere, and trying to make sense of the planet's strange energy signatures. Her mind raced with possibilities, but her thoughts were interrupted by Kane's voice again. "Dr. Vale," he said, "I'll need you to lead the first expedition to the surface. You're the expert, and your research will be crucial to understanding the planet's potential. I'll be accompanying you to ensure the safety of the team." Ilara felt a jolt of anxiety at his words. Kane would be with her, and the idea of spending extended time with him on an alien world made her heart race. She had worked hard to avoid close contact with others, especially men. But now, she had no choice. I'll make the preparations," Ilara said, her voice betraying a hint of unease. Kane didn't seem to notice. His focus was entirely on the mission, which, in a way, made things easier for her. He was professional, always thinking of the team's success. But there was something about his presence that unnerved her, a quiet power that she couldn't ignore. As the crew prepared for the descent, Ilara spent the next few hours in her lab, trying to focus on the data. But her mind kept drifting to Kane. He was confident, capable, qualities she admired, but also feared. His presence was magnetic, pulling her in without her permission. When the time came to board the shuttle for Zephyr-9's surface, Ilara found herself walking alongside Kane. He didn't try to talk to her, respecting her silence. They boarded in quiet, but as the shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Ilara couldn't help but notice the way Kane's calm energy filled the space around them. It was a stark contrast to her own nerves, but it was strangely comforting. "Don't worry, Dr. Vale," Kane said suddenly, his voice calm and reassuring. "We'll get through this. We've got each other's backs." Ilara nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. She had been alone for so long, relying only on her own strength. The idea of trusting someone else, especially someone like Kane, was still a concept she couldn't fully accept. As the shuttle touched down on Zephyr-9's surface, the doors opened, and the crew stepped into the unknown. The air was thick with mystery, and the planet seemed to pulse with an energy Ilara couldn't fully explain. The land stretched out before them, an alien landscape unlike anything she had ever seen. But even as she marveled at the planet's beauty, her thoughts kept drifting back to Kane. There was something about him that made her feel both safe and vulnerable. Something about him that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the walls she had built around herself. As the crew set foot on Zephyr-9, the planet greeted them with an eerie silence. The air was thick, charged with energy, and the landscape stretched before them like something out of a dream. It was both beautiful and unnerving, as if the world itself was waiting for them to make the first move. Dr. Ilara Vale stood at the forefront, her heart racing with both excitement and apprehension. The data she had studied in the lab didn't do this place justice. It felt alive, pulsing with a hidden power that made her skin tingle. Zephyr-9's surface was covered in sprawling fields of shimmering grass that seemed to change colors as the wind blew through them. Massive, twisting trees rose from the ground like sentinels, their trunks glowing faintly in the dim light. The sky above them was a swirling mass of violet and blue, the atmosphere thick with an energy that was both strange and intoxicating. Ilara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had trained for this moment, prepared for countless alien worlds, but this one was different. This planet had a pulse, a rhythm that made her feel as though it were watching her, waiting for something. She glanced over at Captain Darius Kane, who was observing the surroundings with a quiet focus. His calm demeanor had always been a comfort to her, but now she couldn't help but notice the tension in his eyes. He, too, felt the weight of Zephyr-9's mystery. Kane had insisted on accompanying her on the first exploration. He knew how important this mission was to Ilara and how much this planet meant to her. He respected her intelligence and determination, but he also knew that the unknown could be dangerous. He had seen enough in his time as a captain to understand that some planets didn't take kindly to visitors. "We'll stay close to the shuttle," Kane said, his voice cutting through Ilara's thoughts. "Let's get some initial samples and see what we're dealing with." Ilara nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead. She knew that whatever this planet was hiding, it was far more than just a scientific mystery. There was something here, something powerful, and she was determined to uncover it. She wasn't sure what it was, but she felt drawn to it, like a magnet pulling her in. The crew spread out, collecting samples of soil, air, and plant life. Ilara's focus, however, remained on the strange energy readings coming from deep within the planet. The closer they got to the epicenter of these readings, the more the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. It was as if the planet itself was aware of their presence and was waiting for them to make the first move. Ilara's hand shook slightly as she held up her scanner, confirming what she had already suspected. The energy readings were off the charts. This wasn't just a planet. It was a living, breathing entity with intelligence far beyond anything she had ever encountered. It was as though Zephyr-9 itself was trying to communicate with them, but through a language they couldn't yet understand. "Captain, look at this," Ilara called, her voice tight with excitement. Kane stepped over to her, his brow furrowing as he examined the readings. "This isn't normal," he said. "It's like the planet's alive, in some way we can't explain." "I've never seen anything like it," Ilara replied, her mind racing. "The energy patterns are so organized. It's almost like it's trying to communicate with us." Kane looked around at the crew, all of whom were busy collecting their own data. "We need to be careful. If this planet is as sentient as it seems, we might be dealing with more than we can handle." Ilara didn't respond right away. She was too focused on the data, too absorbed in the mystery of Zephyr 9. She could feel it calling to her, urging her to go deeper, to uncover the secrets hidden beneath its surface. But she knew they couldn't rush this. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something that could be understood in a few hours, or even a few days. "I'll stay here," Ilara said after a moment. "I need to take more readings. You and the crew should continue the survey and return to the shuttle if anything feels off." Kane hesitated, his protective instincts flaring up. "You'll be fine." Ilara looked up at him, her eyes locking with his. There was a quiet understanding between them, a silent agreement that he would let her do what she needed to do. She had always been a loner, driven by her work. Kane had learned to respect that, even if it meant stepping back and allowing her the space she needed. "I'll be fine," she reassured him, though she knew the uncertainty lingered in both their minds. She was far from certain of what was happening on Zephyr 9, but there was no turning back now. As the rest of the crew moved off to explore other areas of the planet, Ilara remained where she was, her eyes glued to the scanner in her hands. The energy readings were becoming stronger, more pronounced. She could feel it in the air, like an invisible force tugging at her very being. And then, as if the planet itself had decided it was time, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as she looked up, the sky above her swirling with a strange, almost hypnotic glow. The planet was reacting to them. It was alive, and it wanted something from them. The ground shook beneath Ilara's feet as the strange energy from Zephyr 9 seemed to pulse through the air. The sky above rippled with vivid colors, swirling like a living painting. Ilara's heart raced, her breath catching in her chest as she stood frozen in place. It wasn't just the planet's energy that was overwhelming. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite explain. "Dr. Vale." Kane's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. Ilara snapped back to reality, her mind refocusing as she heard the urgent call. Kane was running toward her, his expression tense, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. The crew was slowly backing away from the epicenter of the disturbance, their faces filled with fear and confusion. "Stay close," Kane ordered, his voice firm. Ilara nodded, trying to steady her shaking hands. She had been studying alien ecosystems for years, but nothing had prepared her for this. It felt like the planet itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. "Is this normal?" Ilara asked, her voice tightened as she glanced at the energy readings on her scanner. They had spiked even higher than before. She could feel the pull of the planet, a strange magnetic force that seemed to be drawing her in. It was as though Zephyr 9 was testing them, challenging them to understand its secrets. "I don't think anything about this planet is normal," Kane replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to be careful. Whatever this is, it's not something we've dealt with before." As the crew began to gather their equipment and prepare to return to the shuttle, Ilara remained focused on the readings. The ground trembled again, and the colors in the sky shifted, growing more intense with each passing second. It was then that she saw something in the distance, a figure barely visible against the landscape, standing in the middle of the fields. "Ilara." Kane's voice was softer now, a note of concern creeping into it. "What is that?" Ilara squinted, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure was tall, and though it was difficult to make out any details, there was something undeniably humanoid about it. It stood still, like a statue, as if waiting for them to approach. "I don't know," Ilara replied, her mind racing. But it's not human. The crew was growing more anxious, their unease palpable. Captain, one of the team members spoke up. We should head back. This doesn't feel right. Kane turned toward Ilara, his gaze intense. Do you think we should investigate? Ilara hesitated, her thoughts swirling. She knew the dangers of rushing into the unknown, but something in her gut told her they couldn't ignore this. This could be the key to understanding the planet, to unlocking its mysteries. We have to, she said, her voice firm. This could be what we've been searching for. Kane nodded, his jaw tightening. Then we'll go together. Ilara and Kane moved toward the figure, the rest of the crew following reluctantly behind them. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to hum with energy. It was like the very ground beneath them was alive, reacting to their presence. Every step felt heavier, as if the planet was testing their resolve. As they reached the figure, Ilara's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a person at all, but an alien structure, ancient and worn, yet strangely beautiful. It rose from the ground like a monument, covered in intricate patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. This is incredible, Ilara whispered, her voice filled with awe. She stepped closer, her eyes tracing the alien symbols that covered the structure. They seemed to be shifting, moving as if alive. Ilara couldn't understand them, but she felt an undeniable pull, a connection, as though the structure was reaching out to her. Kane stepped up beside her, his gaze focused on the alien monument. Is this what you were expecting? He asked, his voice low. No, Ilara admitted, her eyes still locked on the structure. But it's even more incredible than I imagined. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rest of the crew stood in silence, unsure of what to do next. But Ilara felt something stir within her, a deep sense of connection to the planet and its strange energy. She had come here for answers, and it seemed that Zephyr-9 was finally beginning to reveal its secrets. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled again, this time more violently. The air crackled with energy, and the alien structure began to glow brighter. Ilara felt a surge of power wash over her, and she reached out instinctively, her hand hovering just above the surface of the monument. The moment her fingers brushed against the glowing patterns, a wave of information flooded her mind. Images, emotions, and thoughts not her own. An overwhelming flood of alien knowledge that was almost too much to process. Ilara, Kane shouted, but his voice seemed distant, lost in the flood of sensations. Ilara felt herself being pulled deeper into the experience, her connection to the planet growing stronger with each passing second. It was then that she realized Zephyr-9 wasn't just a planet. It was a consciousness, a living being, and it was reaching out to her. Ilara's fingers hovered above the glowing patterns of the alien structure, her body frozen in a trance. The moment her skin touched the surface, a wave of energy surged through her. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like being flooded with an endless stream of information that came from somewhere deep within the core of Zephyr-9. Her mind raced to comprehend the knowledge, but it was too much, too fast. Kane's voice broke through the chaos. Ilara, can you hear me? She could barely focus, her thoughts scattered, trying to understand what was happening. The images came in a blur, alien cities, strange creatures, and endless landscapes that stretched beyond her imagination. She saw flashes of ancient civilizations, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. She felt their emotions, their hopes, their fears. It was as if Zephyr-9 was not just a planet, but a living record of all who had ever inhabited it. For a brief moment, Ilara was disoriented, trapped in a whirlwind of alien memories and knowledge. She gasped for air, her vision blurring as her mind struggled to keep up. She wanted to pull away from the monument, but her body wouldn't respond. The connection was too strong, too deep. Zephyr-9 had reached into her, and now she was part of it, part of its history, its consciousness. Ilara, we need to go. Kane's voice was insistent, but distant. His hand gripped her arm, shaking her gently. "Come on, we're getting out of here." His touch snapped her back to reality. The flood of alien knowledge began to fade, leaving Ilara breathless, but alive. She stumbled backward, her hand still lingering on the monument, as if it were reluctant to let her go. The world around her seemed to return to normal, but the feeling of connection to Zephyr 9 lingered, like an invisible thread tying her to the planet. What was that?" Ilara whispered, still trying to catch her breath. Kane looked at her with concern. "I don't know, but whatever it was, we need to be careful." That didn't look like a normal reaction. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was racing with what she had experienced. The knowledge she had received. Was it a warning? Or a message from the ancient beings who had once lived here? She couldn't make sense of it all yet, but one thing was certain. Zephyr 9 was far more than just a planet. It was a sentient being, and it had chosen to communicate with her. I felt it," Ilara murmured, almost to herself. "The planet. It's alive. It's been waiting." Kane frowned. "What do you mean, it's been waiting?" Ilara hesitated. Her thoughts were still jumbled, but she tried to explain. "The images, the memories. It was like the planet was showing me its history. It's not just a planet, Kane. It's a consciousness. It has lived, experienced things, and it's trying to tell us something. But I don't know what yet." Kane's expression darkened. "This is far more than we bargained for. We need to get back to the shuttle and regroup. I don't trust being out here without more answers." The rest of the crew had gathered at a distance, watching them with wide eyes. They, too, had sensed something was off. There was an unease in the air, a tension that had grown as the planet seemed to shift and react to their presence. Ilara nodded, still reeling from the connection she had felt. She could still sense the faint pulse of the planet beneath her feet, like a heartbeat in the earth. It was calling to her again, but this time, she resisted the urge to reach out. "Let's head back," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But we can't leave just yet. There's more here." "I know it." Kane didn't argue. He understood the obsession that drove Ilara, the pull to uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. But even he couldn't ignore the dangers they were facing. Zephyr 9 wasn't just another planet to explore. It was a living entity, and it had its own intentions. As they made their way back to the shuttle, the air around them seemed to hum with energy. The ground continued to tremble, though less violently than before. It was as if the planet were watching them, tracking their every move, waiting to see what they would do next. "Ilara," Kane said quietly, "we can't let our curiosity blind us. Whatever this planet wants, we have to approach it carefully. We don't fully understand what's happening here." Ilara glanced up at him, her face conflicted. "I know, but I can't walk away without answers. This is bigger than all of us." She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but Kane didn't argue. He knew how important this was to her, even if he was more cautious by nature. He had seen enough in his years as a captain to understand that some mysteries couldn't be ignored, no matter the risk. As they reached the shuttle, Ilara took one last look at the alien monument. The connection was still there, faint but undeniable. She had touched the heart of Zephyr 9, and now she could feel it calling her back. She had to return. There were answers waiting for her. The shuttle door closed with a soft hiss, sealing the crew inside. Ilara took a seat at the console, her mind still racing with what she had experienced on Zephyr 9. The connection to the planet had been overwhelming, but there was something deeper beneath the surface, something important. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had barely scratched the surface of the planet's mystery. "Are we safe here?" one of the crew members asked, his voice uneasy. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone sat in silence, waiting for the next move. Kane, ever the leader, stood near the doorway, his eyes scanning the horizon outside the shuttle's windows. The landscape of Zephyr 9 stretched out before them, the alien monument still visible in the distance, glowing faintly in the dim light. "We're safe for now," Kane replied, though his tone lacked conviction. But we can't stay here for long. We need to figure out what's really going on. Ilara's hands trembled as she typed commands into the shuttle system, pulling up the data they had collected. The energy readings from the planet were unlike anything she had ever seen. The patterns were complex, almost alive. Her mind raced as she tried to piece it all together. It's not just energy, she murmured to herself. It's something else, something intelligent. Kane stepped over, leaning against the console. What do you mean, something intelligent? Ilara glanced up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and concern. I think Zephyr 9 is trying to communicate with us. The way the energy fluctuates, the patterns, it's like it has its own consciousness, and it's been waiting for us to find it. Kane's expression tightened. This is dangerous. If the planet is alive, we need to tread carefully. We can't just assume it's friendly. Ilara nodded, her thoughts still swirling. She had always been a scientist, driven by the need to understand the unknown. But now, she was facing something beyond her comprehension. It wasn't just a discovery. It was a living, breathing entity that had been waiting for contact. The implications were staggering. We can't leave, Ilara said quietly. There's too much at stake. If this planet has the kind of intelligence I think it has, we could learn more than we ever imagined. Kane's eyes softened, though the concern still lingered in his gaze. I know, but we need to make sure we're not walking into something we can't control. Before Ilara could respond, the shuttle sensors beeped, and a warning light flashed on the dashboard. The air in the shuttle seemed to grow thick, heavy with an energy that made Ilara's skin prickle. What is it? Kane demanded, moving quickly to the console. Ilara's fingers flew over the controls as she examined the new data. It's coming from the planet's core. The energy readings are spiking again, much higher than before. Kane's gaze shifted to the window, his expression hardening. The sky outside had changed, the swirling colors now more intense, more erratic. The planet seemed to be reacting to their presence again, as if it were aware of them, watching them from below. It's like it knows we're here, Ilara said, her voice filled with awe. But it's not just aware of us, it's calling to us. Kane stared out at the horizon. This is not just exploration anymore. This feels like an invitation, but we can't be sure what kind of invitation it is. As the shuttle hovered above the surface, Ilara's thoughts raced. The planet's energy was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The more she studied the data, the more it seemed like Zephyr 9 wasn't just a world. It was a living, breathing intelligence with its own desires and intentions. The idea that such a being could exist was both thrilling and terrifying. Ilara. Kane's voice interrupted her thoughts. We need to talk. She looked up, meeting his gaze. His concern was clear, but there was something else in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. A hesitation, a fear that they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. I know you want answers, he said softly, but we have to think about the crew. We can't just dive in without understanding what we're dealing with. I know, Ilara whispered. She understood his caution, but her desire to know more, to understand Zephyr 9, was all-consuming. It was as though the planet was calling to her personally, pulling her into its depths. We'll take it slow, she said, more to herself than to him. But we have to go back. We have to see what's at the heart of this planet. Kane's expression softened, but there was still doubt in his eyes. I'll support you. But we need to make sure the rest of the crew is on board. This is bigger than just us. Ilara nodded. I'll talk to them. As she turned to address the crew, a strange sense of urgency filled the air. The planet's energy was intensifying, and it felt like something was about to happen. Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that the planet was preparing to reveal its true nature. But she had to be ready. Whatever it was, she was determined to face it. The shuttle engines hummed quietly as it made its way back to the surface of Zephyr 9. Ilara sat in the pilot's seat, her hands gripping the controls, though her mind was far from the task at hand. The planet had spoken to her in ways that no human had ever experienced. The connection she felt with it was undeniable, a strange pull that called to her from deep within the planet's core. Kane sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the monitor that displayed the shifting energy patterns. He was silent, deep in thought. His earlier reservations had faded, replaced with a cautious understanding. Zephyr 9 wasn't just a planet. It was a living entity, and he knew Ilara couldn't ignore it. As they descended toward the alien monument once more, the planet's energy pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger as they approached. The sky above them shimmered with strange hues, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The monument in the distance seemed to call to them, its intricate patterns glowing brighter with each passing moment. "Ilara," Kane said, breaking the silence. "Are you sure about this? We don't know what we're dealing with." "I know," Ilara replied, her voice steady but filled with determination. "But I have to know. We have to understand it. This planet, it's waiting for us." Kane hesitated, but there was a trace of respect in his eyes. He understood her drive, her need for answers. He had seen it before, in explorers who were willing to risk everything for discovery. The shuttle touched down gently, and the crew filed out, their expressions wary but determined. The monument loomed before them, its ancient stones radiating energy that seemed to pulse with life. Ilara could feel it in her bones, the undeniable presence of something far greater than any of them could comprehend. "We need to approach with caution," Kane said, his voice firm. "Stay alert." Ilara nodded but couldn't take her eyes off the monument. She knew this was the key. Whatever Zephyr 9 was, it had chosen her, chosen them, to uncover its secrets. She could feel the weight of that responsibility. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready. As they neared the monument, the air around them seemed to hum with energy. The ground trembled slightly, as if the planet itself was alive, reacting to their presence. Ilara reached out, her hand trembling as she approached the glowing patterns etched into the monument's surface. The moment her fingers made contact, the world seemed to shift. The energy from the monument surged through her, far more intense than before. Ilara gasped, her body shuddering as her mind was flooded with visions of ancient civilizations, of life on Zephyr 9 in its prime. She saw towering cities, bustling with life, their technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved. She saw the rise and fall of those civilizations, the triumphs and tragedies that shaped the planet's history. But there was more. Ilara could feel the planet's consciousness, its thoughts reaching out to her. It was as though Zephyr 9 was showing her its memories, its past, its essence. The planet had lived for eons, but now it was dying. Its energy waning, its spirit fading. "Ilara, pull back." Kane's voice cut through the visions, but Ilara couldn't respond. The pull of the planet's consciousness was too strong. She was no longer just a visitor. She was a part of Zephyr 9 itself. The ground beneath her feet cracked, and the monument seemed to vibrate with power. The energy surged, flooding her with a sense of urgency, a desperate need for help. Zephyr 9 was dying, and it needed something, someone, to restore it. "Ilara," Kane shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the monument. The visions faded, and Ilara blinked, disoriented. She stumbled back, her breath shallow, her mind racing. It's alive, Kane. Zephyr 9 is alive, and it's dying. It needs us." Kane's expression was grave. "What can we do? We don't have the technology to fix something like this." "I don't know," Ilara said, her voice trembling. "But I can feel it. We have to do something. The planet, its energy, it's all connected. If we don't act soon, it will fade, and everything here will be lost." Kane turned to the rest of the crew, who were watching with wide eyes, uncertain of what to do next. Ilara's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. Zephyr 9 wasn't just a planet to study. It was a living being, and its survival depended on them. "We can't just leave," Ilara said, her voice firm with determination. "We have to find a way to help. We can't let it die." Kane nodded slowly, his face hardening with resolve. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." The crew gathered around, their sense of uncertainty replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Ilara knew that this was only the beginning. The answers they sought were within reach, but the path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unknowns. But one thing was clear: Zephyr 9's fate was now intertwined with theirs, and they would do whatever it took to save it.